On October 13th, the UN Dispatch published an article titled Gamergate versus the United Nations, written by one David Sullivan. The article is basically about a story I broke on this channel, which of course was disseminated by my friend at the Ralph Retort, and eventually reported on by Breitbart News in a story by Alun Bakari. Working behind the scenes, my friend Dance Fight Till Dawn was playing politician and wrote up the official operations to get all of the Gamergate communities on board and to help raid the Take Back the Tech hashtag and to disrupt the IGF's plan to gather data. The article itself is notably hypocritical, as it calls us conspiracy theorists while engaging in its own brand of conspiracy theories. An excerpt from the article reads, "The next generation of conservative conspiracy theorists is raising the specter of a UN plot to control the internet. This time, conservative media are cheerleading trolling by agitators associated with the online harassment campaign against women in technology and feminist critics of gaming culture, known by the hashtag Gamergate. Their latest targets concern a report on cyber violence against women and girls by the UN Broadband Commission for Digital Development, which has spread to an attack on the Internet Governance Forum and the work of the vital civil society organization, the Association for Progressive Communications." First of all, my original video on the subject involved no conspiracy theories and was well sourced with quotes directly from the people involved if there were any accusations to be made. Secondly, the hyperlink on the words "conservative media are cheerleading" links back to the aforementioned Breitbart article, so the author here seems to be in agony that an actual news site would write an article featuring well-sourced information. And third, on the hyperlink for the word "attack" in his diatribe, he links to the second phase of the operation written by Dance Fight, which was stickied on the subreddit Kotaku in Action. Apparently, he's freaking out that someone downloaded, archived, and exposed all their planning information for their next report on censoring free speech on the internet, and calls civil internet activism and dissenting discussion on a hashtag an attack. The article continues. Online activists genuinely concerned with free speech might want to consider listening to the people and organizations that have spent decades fighting for a more free and open internet, instead of cynically seeking to suppress them. So they're the ones fighting for free speech, supposedly, and we have them all wrong. Yes, this is Orwellian doublespeak here. To say free speech, apparently we need to limit the free speech of some to make others more comfortable to speak. But the questions we should really be asking here are, why is this David Sullivan guy so quick to defend the IGF? And does he have any conflicts of interest which he didn't disclose in this article? Well, according to my findings, the answer is a resounding yes. He apparently hosted official workshops for the IGF in the past. In 2013, Mr. David Sullivan, while he was the Director of Policy and Communications at the Global Network Initiative, actually hosted a workshop for the IGF about a very similar issue. He also proposed to host a workshop for the IGF in 2012, which was apparently withdrawn. And he was also listed as the host organization of a 2014 workshop, which did come to fruition, although he wasn't listed as the moderator of that event like he was with the 2013 workshop. In his article, David did not disclose his prior work with the IGF at all, but now it makes sense why he was so vitriolic in his defense. Actually, it's about ethics in UN journalism. Although the link to the transcript of the 2013 workshop was dead, an official report hosted on the IGF's website remains. There's some very interesting information to be gleaned from this report. It reads, Internet Governance Forum 2013, Workshop 183 Report, Oppression Online, Rights and Restrictions on the Network. Organizer name, Sullivan David. Organizer identity, Global Network Initiative. Workshop theme, Human Rights/Freedom of Expression on the Internet. Concise description. The workshop will explore the social and economic impacts of national-level information and communications technology legislation and regulation, as well as international telecom practices on human rights, particularly freedom of expression and privacy, including the impact of government and private sector practices at the national and international level. Oh, so back in 2013, Mr. David Sullivan was a fellow free speech warrior, fighting to keep the internet safe from authoritarian regimes. It continues, Agenda. What is the private sector doing to address rights to freedom of expression and privacy online? How can diverse stakeholders in the internet government's ecosystem engage with national governments to advance online rights? What can be done at the international level? Is there a role for the International Telecommunications Union or other international institutions? Remote moderator, David Sullivan. Brief substantive summary of the workshop and presentation of the main issues that were raised during the discussions. The panel touched on how government action, example, blocking and surveillance, and inaction, failure to regulate companies, has affected people's rights to freedom of expression and privacy in countries throughout the world. We talked about the value of multi-stakeholder engagement in law and policymaking, particularly in Chile, and through fora such as the Freedom Online Coalition. We talked about the need for government accountability and mechanisms for corporate accountability, as well as how international human rights should guide the approach of both freedom to expression and privacy. The panel also discussed both the collective responsibility as governments, corporations, or civil society, and the individual responsibility to uphold and promote human rights and ensure we minimize online oppression. An emphasis was played on the important role of whistleblowers in highlighting the most egregious examples of online oppression. Reference was made to specific national laws, including those of Indonesia, the UK, and the US. The panel also focused on the various practices that were emerging nationally and transnationally in the telecommunication and internet space that enabled the imposition of oppressive and repressive practices by national governments, at times facilitated by the private sector from these developing and emerging markets. One of the panelists cited the example of regional and national impact by providers, citing the specific example of Etisalat and the monopoly's effect in Pakistan and the region, which had led to monopolistic anti-competitive effects, reducing the number of online service providers, unifying all infrastructure under one telecom provider, and voluntarily bearing the cost and effectively deliberalizing the telecom sector, thereby enabling and facilitating of filtering, surveillance, monitoring all traffic, and driving up costs by charging for services contrary to the principles of net neutrality, and thus widening digital divide. Approximately 60 participants attended the workshop with representation and active participation by governments, civil society, the private sector, and the technical community. Bravo, Mr. Sullivan. You weren't lying in your UN Dispatch article when you claimed that the IGF had fought for freedom of speech on the internet in the past. All of these topics that were brought up in your workshop are something that I applaud you for discussing. They are legitimate concerns and I would have been there fighting along with you. But what you don't realize, Mr. Sullivan, is that the IGF is now fighting to make criticism of feminism illegal. The APC has said that it is fighting to make the internet a safe space for feminist activism. In the APC's official press release from October 9th, Jack Key calls our civil counteractivism an attack and labels us trolls. She said what we did was an example of cyber violence, which is what they're trying to make illegal. No, Jack, you asked for a global online discussion and you got exactly that. It doesn't make us trolls simply because you don't agree with us. And you shouldn't be able to make it illegal just because you think we're trolls. But here is where it starts to get really interesting. It reads, conclusions drawn from the workshop and further comments. The panelists also raised the question of the various international forums or groupings where the issues with respect to oppression may be raised, addressed, and resolved. Though there was little consensus on whether the issue should be taken to the ITU or the UN, there appeared to be a broader consensus in making such issues topics of the next IGF and having groupings such as the Freedom Online Coalition address these challenges. Oh. So the report stated that there was no consensus on whether these very important and legitimate issues should be taken to the UN or the ITU. But that doesn't stop them from going to both the ITU and the UN for bogus claims on cyber violence against women now. But here's the pay dirt. It reads, estimate the overall number of women participants present at the session. It states, about half of the participants were women. To what extent did the session discuss gender equality and or women's empowerment? It was not seen as related to the session theme and was not raised. So there we have it, folks. This panel of 60 or so people actively involved in the industry all saw women's empowerment and gender equality issues completely irrelevant to the topic of protecting freedom of speech on the internet, so they didn't touch on it at all. And this is with half of the participants being women. Furthermore, we already saw them claim that the very legitimate issues mentioned in the report didn't warrant intervention, according to them. So the real questions here are, Why did the IGF see fit to now take what they themselves deemed as irrelevant issues to the UN, when apparently the actual legitimate issues didn't warrant this type of action? And why did Mr. David Sullivan, the author of the UN Dispatch article, feel it necessary to not mention his involvement with the organization?